from the mind that built Axon. In a galaxy where big ideas meet deep conversation, step into the unknown. This is Boldly Go.
Well, we're still not back in the Batcave, Rick. It's obvious from what's behind you and what's behind me. We are still in the dog days of summer here.
Yep, and for all the listeners out there, I'm going to leave the waves here so you can listen to the beautiful sound of the ocean. We're not going to try to edit that out, so hopefully it brings you some enjoyment.
Rick is in the same place he was last episode. I am not on Bald Head Island. I will be there in a day or two. I'm at an undisclosed location outside of DC. Why don't we get started, Rick?
Here we go.
Welcome to episode 14. Welcome to episode 14 of the Boldly Go podcast. We had quite a doozy of a podcast the last episode. I'm just going to start by hitting some highlights, Rick. And just so we
bring us up to speed.
Just so we remember, and you add at any point, because it was a crazy episode, and you covered a lot. And as I said, like that is Netflix worthy. That's probably like 4 or 5. That's 4 or 5 shows that we covered just in one podcast episode. So let me cover. We were into 2004, into 2005, in just that very, very short time frame. I actually had to write some notes, which I normally don't do for the podcast, but let me tell you what we covered. Number 1, media and short seller attacks. Number 2, discovery of a corporate mole. And by the way, let me just pause there for 1 second. I was at headquarters a few days ago, and I think you know Laura Rodriguez. Like that, when she listened to that episode and heard that story, she had been waiting to hear more about the corporate mole. She knew so much about it that she said that's one of the best stories that we told in the entire podcast. So that's
First time I ever had an assistant, and I would not get an executive assistant for another decade after that.
But that's not it. Also, patent dispute, and let's call it alleged, in my words, not alleged extortion by your patent attorney at the time.
Yeah, and I don't think I shared during the show, not only when we sued him, were we awarded the patent and we didn't have to debate inventorship, he also was ultimately disbarred. So it continues to show me that when you feel the right thing to do is fight, you fight. And it almost always works out.
And I did, like I mentioned on the last episode, when I was in headquarters, I did take a picture. If you ever come to our headquarters, we have a wall with all the patents. I did take a picture that I'll drop into the show notes of that particular patent. But that's not it. We had one more big thing that we covered that was occurring in the 2004, really, obviously we're in 2005 during this part of the discussion, and that was the shareholder lawsuit and the legal strategy around that shareholder lawsuit, and that is where we left off the last episode. So why don't we start there, and coming out of you settled those shareholder lawsuits, and where did you go from there?
Well, we didn't settle the lawsuits until a few years later. So if we go back into 2005, we're under federal investigation from the SEC. We've set the record for the most shareholder lawsuits against any client of Wilson Sonsini. In addition to that, we're getting flooded suddenly with product liability lawsuits. What happens when you get all these all the negative press and you're under a government investigation? Plaintiffs' attorneys across the board, they have groups where they share ideas about who to sue, et cetera, and it's kind of a herd mentality. The herd of plaintiffs' attorneys were coming for Taser. And so we were getting sued left and right. Before then, we'd never had a single lawsuit. And then suddenly by mid-2005, in 6 months, we were flooded with lawsuits. It went from like zero expense to one of our largest expenditures. And as I mentioned, thank goodness we had Doug Clint as our general counsel. Like, I'm not sure the company would have survived if we didn't have Doug Clint there to build an in-house litigation machine.
Let me ask a question, though. I mean, this is not the Joe Rogan podcast, so we don't talk a lot about conspiracies. But, there was, I think we laid out in the last podcast, a coordinated effort on of short sellers. I mean, do you think there was some coordination between the short sellers and the plaintiffs' attorneys in these lawsuits as well, or are these separate?
Hard to say, but I mean, they're all bedfellows, right? Like, it's like when a shark attacks in the water, there's blood in the water, it attracts other sharks and other scavengers, shall we say. And so, 2005, everybody was coming after us. It was a year of misery. We were terrified. Was our company going to survive? Were we going to end up in jail? How bad was this going to get? The stock was down. Our shareholders were angry at us. I had to move my family into a gated neighborhood in a house I bought through an offshore corporation so that you wouldn't be able to do any records to figure out who lived there.
Wow.
It's scary shit when that's happening. And I just, in early 2004, had a 1-year-old daughter I had to be thinking about. 2005 was just an extremely rough year. And in fact, in the middle of that year, our first case went to trial pretty quick. And that was an injury case. An officer in Arizona, his last name was Powers, and he had gotten injured when he was hit with a taser weapon. And by the way, we didn't dispute, he did get injured. He had severe osteoporosis. In fact, his own doctor had said, he could have gotten severely injured on a roller coaster ride. And had he known about his osteoporosis, he would have been barred from being a police officer. There's no way that he could have risked being into any sort of physical confrontation or any physical training. He was a very fragile individual. The case that his attorneys made against us was that we had a duty to warn that if you had this obscure, severe osteoporosis, you shouldn't get hit with a taser because you might get hurt.
Yeah.
Now, this is why in America we have all these disclaimers and waivers that list 80,000 different things that might go wrong because of exactly this sort of thing. Now, to this day, my belief is nobody reads those warnings anyway.
Right.
And the more shit you put in a warning, the less meaning the warning. We've all become numb to them. Like when we rent skis or buy an over-the-counter medication, there's so much bullshit fine print, nobody reads it. But ultimately, that's how the courts judge you, is you've got to have, your defense is, well, we put in the fine print that this is a risk, even though, I think we'd be in a better world if we just lived with some common sense that, hey, if you've got the big picture warnings, which we've always had, that the taser causes strong muscle contractions and makes you fall down. Now, might have a million different things where that's a bad idea. We shouldn't have to try to list every conceivable medical condition, So, yeah, of course, if you had an ounce of common sense and you had severe osteoporosis, you would know getting hit and knocked to the ground with a taser was a bad idea.
And that, John Oliver, is why we have so much language in our waivers. And for those who listen to our John Oliver episodes, he brought that up. But here is one example, your first lawsuit, why we have to have so much in our waivers before you take a voluntary exposure.
Yep. Now, this was interesting because when we went to trial, one of the primary witnesses, and by the way, I have nothing against Officer Powers or Deputy Powers. He was a sheriff. I feel bad he got injured for sure. His attorney was a first-class jerk, though. I mean, this guy was just the prototypical ambulance chaser, greasy personality you would expect. Anyway, so when we get to trial, their main witness was Hans Marrero, who all our viewers met.
Oh, yeah.
Many weeks ago. And look, he is a Marine Corps gunnery sergeant, right? And this sort of attorney who thought he was a little too clever for himself and he was so smart, he was going to make Hans look dumb on the stand.
Bad idea.
And so he gets Hans up on the stand. I remember as he's examining Hans Marrero, he's leading down this path. Well, Mr. Marrero, did you, in your warnings, ever mention osteoporosis? No, we didn't. Mr. Moreira, did you ever mention that if you fell down and you had osteoporosis, that the taser fall might cause an injury, right? And he goes down and he lays out like these 10 cases where he gets Hans to agree with him. And he says, all right, Mr. Moreira, I'm going to script the delivery here. But he basically said, so you're telling me that nowhere in your warnings did you have a warning that if you had osteoporosis, you shouldn't get hit with a taser? And Hans looks at the guy and he says, well, sir, I've been to flight school in the military and they don't have any signs that say if you're blind, you shouldn't be a pilot. And the jury roared with laughter. That's when I knew we'd won the case. The judge had to call order in the courtroom. It was just such a powerful moment where the common sense of Gunny Marrero just put this fancy, clever lawyer right in his place.
That's incredible. That is incredible. And I could also imagine it with Hans's delivery. That would have brought the courthouse down, if you will, courtroom down.
Look, I was worried for Hans. I was watching him get set up here, and you're like, oh gosh, is he getting cornered? Is this attorney gonna get the best of him? And it was one of those moments. That was one of Hans's greatest moments. It was just such a burst of common sense that everybody was like, yeah. And look, Mr. Powers didn't know he had this condition either. So even if we had the warning, right, it wouldn't have made a difference. He didn't know. He found out because of the injury in this case was when he was examined. His doctors discovered, my gosh, you've got this really severe osteoporosis.
Yeah. That was it. That was it for the case once he said that.
Well, there was one more interesting thing that happened. So what happens in a lawsuit is the plaintiff puts on their case, right? And during that, it's dark days for the defense because you haven't defended yourself yet. All the case is being laid out against you.
Right.
And so right when the plaintiffs rested their case, our insurance company comes forward and says, hey, we're going to make an offer of settlement for $1.5 million. And I remember Doug and I were panicking. We're like, what do you mean? You can't do that. And they're like, well, and I learned from talking to our supporting attorneys, this is very normal, that this is like standard practice. The plaintiffs put on their case, and when the insurance company is at the peak of darkness, that's when the plaintiffs want to settle.
Right.
So we scrambled, and then we put together our response to our insurance company, which was, if you pay the plaintiff, we are going to sue you for destroying our business. Because if you pay here, then there will be an endless raft of lawsuits against us. We make equipment that's used in high-risk situations. If we reward people who sue us anytime there's some sort of injury, our business would no longer make sense. Right. It would be economically impossible.
That would be
and so,
beginning of the end if you'd settled.
That would have been the beginning of the end. But, insurance company, we've got a deal for you. You can avoid us suing you. And the way you can do that is you can pay us. We will settle with you, and we're going to give you a discount. We will settle for $1.45 million. So you can save $50,000, and we will sign away your liability as our insurer, and we will take the liability back on ourselves.
Wow. That is a incredible strategy. Yeah,
to my awareness, it's the first time I've heard of it being done. And our insurance, I think in general, this was a very bold move.
Yeah.
Now, what happened? We won the lawsuit, and the insurance company had paid all the legal fees up until that point, because we did have, in addition to our in-house counsel, we had, out-of-house trial counsel as well. So it cost us about $50,000 to finish the lawsuit for our legal fees. So we made a $1.4 million profit from our insurance company buying themselves out of the litigation.
Wow. Did they continue to be your insurance company after that? That was it?
Oh yeah. They weren't mad at us. It was, the insurance guys are actuaries, right? They're, no offense to anybody, but they're looking at how they minimize their risk, and they tend to be very risk averse. But this turned out to be one of the most important decisions we ever made, because it would take another decade, but we rarely get sued anymore because
they know you're not.
You don't want to pick a. That's right. you don't want to pick a fight with that one-eyed crazy guy on the street corner because he's unpredictable. And if you're a plaintiff's attorney, these plaintiff's attorneys, they're in business, right? It costs them money to sue and a lot of time and effort. And they don't want to take the risk of going to trial and losing. So they prefer easy marks where you sue with your typical insurance setups or frankly, this is a big problem for cities because cities will almost always settle police department cases.
That's right.
And then that just invites more litigation.
And so, and they would have surely taken the payout from the insurance company for that offer that they were trying to make. And then the plaintiff's attorney would have walked away with a nice chunk of change, and Mr. Powers would have had a small payout.
I don't know if they would have taken it. I would say, look, that was the starting offer. There
Right.
probably would have been some negotiation.
Yeah.
They probably would have gotten the insurance company to pay more. So I think our insurance company got a deal, and so did we.
Yeah.
And this would go on to become, I think there was at least one more time where we settled out with our own insurance, and it was to send a message. If you sue Taser the company, Taser International, that was our name back then. If you sue us, be ready to go to the mat because it's gonna be expensive. We're gonna bring 12 experts right out of the gate. We will go nuclear every time, and we will fight to our dying breath because we believe we're in the right. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, unless you are confident you've got a case where you're going to beat us in court at the end of a trial, don't bring us in. In fact, we've since heard that specifically plaintiffs that sue police will leave Taser, now Axon, out of the litigation because they know
You're going to fight it.
frankly, cities are typically a pretty easy mark. Elected politicians don't like the look of losing a case. Mm-hmm. Their insurance is likely to want to settle. And by the way, this really irritates police departments, right? Because if you're a cop doing a hard job and you did the right thing, and then your agency settles and it makes you look like you were guilty, this drives police agencies nuts. But they're not the decision makers. The cities are.
Yeah, I was the chief operating officer in Seattle. I think many people know that. And when I saw some of the lawsuits the city was facing and paying out, it was just, to your point, disheartening to the police department and disheartening to members of the police department, those officers on the street who knew this was happening and you knew you didn't do anything wrong, and that there were people that this is a business. Like this was a business for those attorneys, and they were making money on the backs of those police officers who were out there trying to do the right thing and were doing the right thing, and the city would just settle.
Yeah. There's one other thing I think viewers should know about here. I think we talked previously about the idea of civil rights attorneys.
Right.
And when you hear that name, you think, by that brand, you think like Martin Luther King, you
Right.
think like civil rights activists and civil rights leaders. And in some cases, look, that's true. But a lot of these guys, these are plaintiffs' attorneys that are suing on contingency fees. I view it like they're frankly preying on the pain of these families to go make a buck. Mm-hmm. And one thing that makes this problem worse is under the federal civil rights laws, if you win any payment from the police department, even if it's $1, many times they have to pay your legal fees. Mm-hmm. And so that actually creates a huge incentive for police to get sued all the time because there's very little downside for the attorneys. They almost always get a payday. Now, that might sound great if you take this viewpoint that money is free and the government is some nameless, faceless entity. But when you realize that's our tax dollars
Right.
that are going there, like they're just getting wasted because there's this perverse incentive that everybody should sue the police every time anything ever happens because it's almost a guaranteed payday for the lawyers.
It's a cottage industry, for sure. Now, you're not, and just like there are really good civil rights attorneys out there doing good civil rights work, we're not saying all the time that police departments are in the right. There are a small percentage at the times when lawsuits are, lawsuits are brought and they are paid out or they won in trial. But I would say that is a very, very, very small percentage of the time.
Yes, and look, there's good people and bad people everywhere. If you have this idea that attorneys suing police are righteous crusaders, that is far from the truth. These are not nonprofits. These firms
to make money.
make a lot of money, and the type of people attracted to it are many times, I would just say they fit some of the stereotypes of like the sort of greasy attorney who's out chasing ambulances.
Did you have any like other companies hear about this, or other startups, or and since then, and have talked to you about this legal strategy?
Yep. Yeah, in general, one thing that was actually pretty weird, pretty wild. We were named the Ernst & Young Entrepreneurs of the Year in Arizona. It's a prestigious award in 2002 or so. And I got invited to like the World Forum of the winners of the Entrepreneurs of the Year. So it was in Monaco, black tie event. And you meet all these entrepreneurs who've been very successful.
Twist your arm and go to Monaco. I know that was a hard decision there.
It was. But the thing that was amazing is pretty much every one of those entrepreneurs had been through the shareholder lawsuit shenanigans. Because most of them, by the time you get there, you're a public company, and everybody was just sort of like commiserating. It's like a tax. It is a tax on the financial system because the system is so messed up that it makes you can't fight these shareholder suits. If your stock drops, you're going to get sued, and you're just going to make a payout. And that's the thing they showed me. You just need to think of it like it's just a tax for being a company in America, which is just makes my skin
absolutely
crawl.
Bananas. So you fought the man, if you will. You fought the system, and you won. And that's going to be a common theme. And there's one big episode I know we're going to talk about where you took something all the way to the Supreme Court because you knew, like, as we talked about a lot last episode, and something you believe near and dear to your heart. You just said it, and you learned it from your father, as we talked about. When you know something is right, you fight for it.
That's right. Yep. So that was 2005. As we roll into next year, 2006. So coming out is now
on December 31st, when the clock strikes midnight, the ball drops, and you're in 2006. Was there some relief that you're like, holy shit, I'm so glad we made it out of this year alive?
Man, I don't remember. I can't remember if the SEC was done with their investigation or not. So yeah, it actually was. It wasn't until mid 2006 that the SEC was done. So 2005 ended. We're still in a position of great uncertainty.
You didn't feel relief heading into 2006 yet.
Yeah, we didn't know yet how this was going to turn out. But one thing that had happened in there is this is when we began working on the taser cam. So all this controversy got us thinking, you know what? We need to be able to record what happened when a taser is used. Like, what you hear from the police and what you hear from the families of people involved in these cases are so different that it's like they're talking about two different planets. We realized we need to at least have a recording of what happened. So we created a new battery module you could put into the bottom of the X26 that had a camera built into it so that it would record the taser hits. Now that turned out to be not the greatest product, because it turns out from a weapon safety standpoint, officers are typically pointing the taser at the ground until the last moment. Like, as they say, don't point a weapon at someone until you're ready to use it. And so we would miss most of the context of what led up to the taser use because they would only arm it right at the last second. So you had sort of like this highlight reel of the greatest taser moments, but really no context. Like, okay, what was really going on?
So, I mean, spoiler alert, like this is the beginning of the body camera business.
Yep. Yeah, we had 2 iterations of taser cam where you had the cameras on the taser before then realizing, you know what, we need to move the camera off the weapon and just onto the officer so we can record the whole scene every time, whether or not they use a taser or a gun or no use of force. But that was 2006 was when this journey began.
And how was it perceived by police? Those early versions, or the early version?
I would say taser cam was okay. In fact, we had certain countries. I believe Australia actually passed regulation that you had to have a taser cam. That ultimately that created some headwinds for us later when we in newer tasers, we stopped putting the camera on the taser because
Right.
it made no sense to have it there if we have it on the officer. So I would say it was generally pretty well received. It was more well received than the body camera. When we moved it on the officer's body, that's when we saw really a ton of pushback. Because then officers were like, I don't want to be recorded all day. I don't mind recording the last, when I'm actually using a taser, but the full shift or full incidents, that was a much
And if
tougher
you think
part.
back to the time, 2006, let's see, was the iPhone released in 6 or '07? So whatever wasn't widespread by then. You didn't have everybody filming everything all the time. So this is a sort of a different world. You had flip phones back then. You had camcorders. You had digital cameras that you could record on, but you didn't. It's not like it is today, where everything, anytime a police officer does anything, they're recorded from multiple angles by some camera.
Yep, that's right. I think iPhone was 2007-ish, but remember the iPhone didn't have a camera either at
Right.
first. Like the first generation,
That's a good.
and then I think the iPhone 3G may have had a camera. It was a shitty still camera, didn't really do video. It was a while. It was probably 2010, 11, 12 till cameras really
That's
started
right.
hitting.
I didn't
on
think about that.
smartphones.
I just think about an iPhone. You think of a camera. No, the first, if you were just happy you could play your music on your phone.
Yeah, by the way, this camera right here, I'm recording to an iPhone today. I brought an expensive, studio camera. It turns out my iPhone is doing a better job. In the last episode, we had all these dark shadows. The iPhone it's the best camera in the world, I think. So here you go, Apple.
It's wild
Kudos
to
you.
think that you're recording off of your iPhone a podcast. Crazy. Okay, so you
Yep.
start putting a camera on a taser.
Yep. So that was sort of the big thing in 2006. From there, like the next big change was really in 2007. All right, so I would say this: 2004 was a banner year, right? We were the number one stock in the world. Then 2005 was a misery. It was just the SEC investigations, et cetera. 2006 was a year of recovery. Our sales came back to the 2004 levels from a significant decline, and we were kind of back on our feet in 2000. The SEC was done, and so in 2007, we had three kind of big product launches. The first was we launched the consumer C2. So we went back into the consumer market, and the thesis there was early tasers didn't work very well. Right? We went into policing to prove that they could work really well, and we proved that out with the M26, the X26. Now it was okay. Let's take this high power, high effective taser weapon back into the consumer space. And so we did it with a device called the C2. It was almost looked like an electric shaver, much less aggressive design. And we've continued to sell variations of that since then. We have a small consumer business. I wouldn't say it failed, but it's continued to be a very small
And
business.
did you sell that? Did you guys
In
sell
fact-
that through Sharper Image? Like, how were you selling it at C2 at the time?
The C2 was sold mostly like through gun stores and through taser.com. And I would say over the years, continually people would come back in our management meetings and it would be, hey, we should shut down the consumer business, right? It's a different business. It's kind of small. We're not great at it.
We don't know how to do
And
it.
I finally
heard
just,
that.
I finally just would pound my fist on the table, said, I don't want anybody to ever bring this up again. We are keeping this taser business for this simple reason. We have a moral obligation to make the taser alternative, the taser weapon alternative available, because police shoot and kill around 1,000 people in officer-involved shootings. The general public shoots and kills between 40 and 50,000 people a year. So from both a moral perspective, it's as long as we've got a product, if we can make one that's a viable self-defense tool, we need to make it available. And there will come a day when we finally figure out how to make the taser a really powerful civilian self-defense system. And if I shut down the business, we may never bring it back. And so we've kept that business on life support for several decades. And a little hint here, stay tuned, folks. 2026 is the year we will be bringing back a consumer taser. And I think we've found the magic. I think we've found something that And it's really targeted for gun owners. Gun owners are going to absolutely love what we're creating. And we've learned that most gun owners, look, every gun owner doesn't want to kill somebody. The last thing they ever want to do is actually have to use their gun. So we will be bringing out a new type, a radically new consumer taser next year that I think is going to change the world.
Very exciting. And I mean, sort of, you said you want to bring Captain Kirk's phaser to police, so they have alternative to using lethal force, and it's bringing Captain Kirk's phaser to the public, so they also have an alternative to using lethal force if they have to defend themselves.
100%. Yep. So we kept in 2007. We re-entered consumer, and we've been there ever since with a small, scrappy business.
And one thing, when you say police killings, let's be clear. We're talking about when police have to use use their firearm or some weapon to take a life, and 99 point something % of those are justifiable by law, by policy. I just want to make sure in our language, because it drives me crazy when I see it in the media and elsewhere, and I hear, police violence, police killings, et cetera. It paints a picture that they're somehow doing something wrong, when we know from the data that they're not.
Yep, vast majority of the time. Yep, there was no judgment intended there. It was just the scale of lives lost in policing is like 2% of the problem. 98% of the lives lost in gun violence involve the general public in suicides, homicides, and gun accidents, as well as legitimate self-defense.
All right, sorry about that, but I just want to make sure we're precise in some of our language too, because we have a lot of police officers that listen and watch this podcast. All right, so we are in the consumer business in 2006. You're back in. You come back into the consumer business.
Yeah. Now, I actually want to share. I want to share a little bit of a personal story that also happened in 2006. So, I'm watching the Adam Sandler movie Click.
I have not seen it.
Have you ever seen it, Mike? Okay. So, had a pretty big impact on me. So, Adam's in the movie. Adam Sandler, it's called Click. And it's the story of Adam Sandler, who has a remote control that allows you to remote control your life. Meaning, like, and there's very funny scenes, like when his wife is complaining at him, he hits the mute button so he doesn't have to listen to it. He can hit the fast forward button, like when the kids are fighting and he's dealing with the frustrations at home, and so he can fast forward to that to get back to work. And the punchline of the whole movie is, by the end, he loses control of this because it's a smart remote, and it learns what he's doing, and it ends up disengaging him from all of life's family moments and all that. And he lives as a workaholic and just fast forwards through his whole life. And then, of course, at the end of the movie, he's this old man full of regrets. And I had this powerful wave come over me. I was like, holy shit, that's me. Like, I'm so focused and stressed out at work. I'm not a good father. I'm not engaged with my wife. And so I went to my brother Tom and I said, I've had this realization, like, I don't want to go through life and end up dead at my desk. I want to retire and take some time and, go really focus on being a father and kind of making sure that I'm engaged in this life. And frankly, like our father had been a workaholic for much of his career, and there's much I loved about my dad. That was not one of the things I wanted to emulate. And it was funny because when I had this conversation with my brother Tom, he said, hey, wait a minute. I'm feeling the same way. And like, I'm older than you. His kids were older. And we talked about it and said, man, we both can't do it. So I guess as the older brother, you're right. Like, okay, I'll stay because we both can't leave. And so Tom retired, and he went and he actually bought a boat and lived in the Mediterranean. Wow. And had some fantastic life experiences. It was your idea. You watched the movie. It's your idea, but Tom took advantage of it. Yeah, it created a little bit of stress between the two of us. There were some times where I felt like, hey, man, you stole my life's dream here. I do watch a lot of movies, and I've watched a lot of Adam Sandler movies, but Click is not like at the top of the Adam Sandler playlist. But now I'm going to have to go back and watch it after listening to this. Helped change your life. Well, and it is pretty funny that, a lot of people like to be inspired by Van Gogh or some fancy art or something. And for me, it's this Adam Sandler movie. It's got me feel like, my God, that's me. I'm just fast forwarding through my life, work all the time. All right, so let's stick a pin in that. So I ended up staying, at Taser, and Tom, when he retired, he would come back for a stint for a few years and then retire again. But let's come back to the work story. So in 2000, so we roll into 2007. We launched the C2 consumer Taser, and then there were two other, I think, pretty transformative technologies that we launched. One of them was the XREP, which was the extended range electronic projectile.
That's where
XREP came from. So the XREP, this was probably our greatest technical achievement. We managed to shrink a Taser weapon down into the size of a shotgun casing. We took the whole system and could put it into a projectile. And that projectile, it was basically like a mini rocket ship. It was a flying aerial vehicle with electronics and a Taser payload, and it had to hit the target and implant 2 electrodes. But remember, with Taser, we need to get those electrodes far apart. They can't be right next to each other, or you just get a local pain effect. And so we designed this whole system where if the projectile hits, it would bounce off the person, and it would have a tether, and we would use that recoil. And then when it came swinging back in, it would deploy these secondary electrodes, inspired by the cholla cactus. If you've ever been in Arizona, where you get near one, it kind of jumps at you.
Jumped on my arm not too long ago. I never heard about that before, or even knew about it till about a month ago, and one jumped on my arm. So I know exactly what you're talking about.
So yeah, the XREP was, and we actually have this very clever design. Let's say that the cholla barbs, which were on the body of it after it fell away, if those didn't stick, the natural human instinct is it would still hurt where there's 2 electrodes on the front that are close together. And in that area, it's going to hurt because there's electricity. It's not going to incapacitate you. If you go to grab it, which is the natural human thing to do, we had a rear-facing barb waiting for your hand. So if you tried to grab it, we would stick a barb into your hand, and now we could run the electricity from your hand all the way through your arm and body to that other electrode. It was it was pretty devious in some ways, that we're actually using some of these reflexes against them to incapacitate them. If I pause for a second, this was the original business plan idea I had back in 1998, was this wireless 12-gauge round. And the math behind it was actually pretty simple. And I would share this. Everything I've needed to know to do all the product ideation and invention at Axon, I learned through high school physics. Everything beyond that, frankly, I found a little distracting. Like when you get too deep into calculus equations and all that, you can kind of lose the big picture. So for example, now you need experts around, guys like Max Nerheim, who is our chief electrical inventor. But I'm just dumb enough to ask a bunch of dumb questions. And so the dumb question, when I first thought about these stun guns, like everybody who looks at this, they immediately thinks, well, of course, you want to make a wireless one. Well, how would you do that? Well, you got to make it a lot smaller. And so I was going to the library, reading everything I could about electricity. I had my mom, remember I was living in Europe at the time when this idea first struck me. So I had her send me my high school physics textbook so I could read about how electricity works, et cetera, et cetera. And the insight was really simple. There's this equation, power equals current times voltage. And everything I read was that all that mattered for incapacitating somebody with electricity was the amount of current. Now, the stun guns of the day would operate, they would say they were like 100,000 volts or 50,000 volts. And so if you basically then look at this and say, well, what if we don't need 50,000 volts? Like, I know you need the high voltage to punch through the clothing, because that's what voltage does. It's like pressure that can force electrons to jump a distance or go through a resistor. But if we're willing to punch the darts through the skin, we don't need the 50,000 volts. If we can do it at 500 volts, so again, simple math here, if power equals current times voltage, and we hold the current constant, right? Whatever, it doesn't even matter what the current is. That stays the same. If the voltage goes down from 50,000 volts to 500 volts, that's a drop of 99%. Then the power required will also drop by 99%. So P equals I times, 1/100 left, the P goes down. And what that meant, and I would go around and bug everybody who was an electrical engineer, hey, how does all this stuff work? How do transformers work? And what I kept hearing is the size of all these components is related to how much power is required. And so indeed, if we could drop power requirements by 99%,
Right.
you could run this thing on a watch battery instead of on
And
a
you don't need the wire.
9 volt or a bunch of
Wires.
AA's. You wouldn't need the wire. The thing would get a lot smaller. When I first met Jack Cover in his garage in Tucson, that is what I went to ask him. I went and I showed him, hey, look, here's my simple high school physics. P equals I times V. If we drop the voltage to 500 and we're willing to puncture the skin, then can we reduce the size of all these components, et cetera? And I remember him looking at me and he's like, well, I don't know. That's an interesting question, but you're going to have to do a lot of testing. Why don't we go build this air taser? And he convinced me. And so I shelved the X-Rep.
Until now.
Now, I think what, again, is interesting about this is, well, until now, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you, X-Rep failed as a product. And so it was my original business idea. We didn't pursue it to go pursue the air taser, which failed. And then the auto taser, which failed. And then with the M26, when we went into law enforcement, we fixed the effectiveness problem by increasing the power, the current in particular. And that finally worked. This, again, I think is interesting to entrepreneurs. Like, it doesn't matter if your initial idea is right. Like, a lot of times your business plan is wrong. As Mike Tyson says, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. I got punched in the face over and over, but we kept recovering and trying new things, and then the business finally worked. But I was so proud when, years later, we returned in 2007 back to the X-Rep, and we proved in the animal lab that it worked. And by the way, some of the testing that we were testing for the X-Rep is also what allowed us to make the X26, where we would make this two-part phase with high voltage and low voltage. But ultimately, even though this was a massive, scientific breakthrough, technological breakthrough, the X-Rep failed as a product, and we ultimately discontinued it. It failed for a couple reasons. One very simple reason was the price point. Like building a taser into a shotgun shell, we had to use very expensive small parts, flexible circuit boards that could be folded on each other, and we would charge, it was a disposable, and we were charging $150 a shot. And by the way, we were not making much money. Yep. Our cost was pretty close to that, and yet our customers were getting angry at us. They would literally get red-faced, like, this is a ripoff. It can't cost $150 a shot. So that was number one. Number two, it actually didn't work that well, like getting through heavy clothing and stuff, those choya barbs. Gotcha. It only worked about half the time. And that was a bad combination. It's high priced and it's not reliable. Now our customers were getting really angry.
We do, to this day, there are some loyal X-Rep users, and maybe they like the concept and the idea. Maybe they didn't deploy it that much, and maybe they didn't have to pay for it. Maybe they weren't the ones writing the check out of the department. But we get the question quite a bit. One, why won't when are you going to bring the X-Rep back? And then two, and it's related to that, why can't you make a wireless taser? A taser that doesn't have to have an attached wire.
Yep. Well, I would tell you this. The technology that was in the X-Rep is at the core of Taser 10. And so we ultimately shut down the X-Rep. And by the way, there were a number of other products we launched around the same time, and they were all failing simultaneously. So actually, let me talk about those, and then we'll come back to X-Rep.
If you just listen to the last 5, 6, 7 minutes of the podcast, I'm like, damn, Rick, that's a lot of failures you just rattled off in a very short period of time over the company's history there.
Dude, I am the king of failure. And look, I would actually say, I like to joke that I had Steve Jobs syndrome in 2000. Right, that was the peak. He's launching the iPhone. He's having these great launch events where he's coming in and he's delighting the world with these amazing new inventions. And after our early failures, I had 2 mega hits back to back with the M26 and then the X26. And so coming off of that, I had some hubris. I was like, I got this. I'm 10 feet tall. Like, I know what our customers need. And I'm going to work with our engineers, and we're going to invent all this cool stuff. And then we're going to launch it from the stage in these dramatic unveilings. And we're going to pull the curtain off. Okay, so let me run through the parade of products that Steve Jobs' delusional Rick launched in that time period. So there's the X-Rep. There's another one called Shockwave. So Shockwave was an area coverage weapon. Now remember, this is the peak of the surge in Iraq. You know, we're at war. There's suicide bombers coming up on checkpoints. No way to stop them non-lethally. And so we had this idea of having an area coverage. Think of it like a claymore mine that would shoot out taser darts. And so we made this thing. It was actually a really cool product. It had 6 taser cartridges, but then you could put these together like Lego blocks. And so you could do like 4 of these would cover almost 180 degrees. Plus you could stack them 3 high, so you'd have 3 salvos. Everybody who saw it thought, man, this thing is really cool. But we took it to the military, and they were like, we have no requirement for this. And so one thing I learned, we actually shut down our DoD business for a while before bringing it back. You can't just show up to the Department of Defense with a great invention and they just buy it. You have to build institutional, there has to be what are called requirements, where it's like they actually need this, and there's a doctrine for how they would use it, and there's advocates within the DoD that are going to go through the entire budget process, through the massive bureaucracy that is the Pentagon. And you know, if you haven't done that pre-work,
doesn't matter.
Then you can show up with the best thing in the world, and there's nobody there. Like, there's nobody that's built the advocacy to walk this through the bureaucracy and buy it. So that was Shockwave. And even though, like, when we talk to soldiers with mud on their boots, they're like, yeah, this should be great for checkpoints in Iraq. Around the same time, we also launched the body camera. Now, this is coming into like 2008 or 9, but there's like a couple year run where we also launched the body camera. And our first generation of the body camera, we got a little carried away. You know, I was really excited about this. We designed not only a wearable camera, we did our own touchscreen computer, and we did an interface that would connect to your radio. And so the idea was you'd have the camera, you'd wear it on your head, it would have a speaker and a mic, so it would talk to your radio, and you'd have this touchscreen computer you'd wear on your belt. And the thing just exploded in complexity.
Is that Axon Body 1, or is this pre-Axon Body 1?
This was what we call Axon Pro. It was the very first. At the time, we just called it the Axon camera. So we launched that. That was where we went from Taser Cam to the Axon camera, and then there was one other one in there, which was the X3.
The X-Rep, the Shockwave, Axon Pro / Axon camera, and now you have a 4th one.
Oh yeah, well, and there's one more. There's evidence.com. So when we launched the wearable cameras, we also had this realization that we would have to do software. And we had a realization that there's 20,000 police departments in the country. If every one of them has to set up and run their own video server, it will never scale. And so here we took a page out of the Apple playbook that would eventually be proven right. But at the time, it was absolutely wrong. Customers didn't want it. And that was this. When Apple launched the iPod, there were plenty of MP3 players. The world didn't need another MP3 player, but what Apple had done was the hardware and the software beautifully integrated, and they moved the music management to the cloud. So the iTunes store, right? By this time, people weren't buying CDs really anymore. You were buying the music online and putting it on your device. And we realized this is how body cameras should work for police. Because if they all have to figure out how to manage all the data, it'll never happen. But if we could sell them the camera and a dock, and hey, we manage everything, it's like iTunes in the cloud, but it's evidence.com in the cloud, that it's no pain for you to be able to deploy this. And you don't have to solve the detecting problems. Well, hold on. Let me give you one more arrow for the board to fire me before we get there. So that one is the X3. And the X3, here was the basic insight. We knew that the X-Rep round was really for long distance, fired from a shotgun. We knew we would need a close quarter taser weapon. But up until that point, all of our tasers were single shot. only one shot with 2 darts. If you miss, it's like a muzzle loader. You've got to reload this thing. And so we wanted to have a multi-shot weapon. Now, the original taser, way back in the 1970s, had 2 cartridges. And it had this swing arm switch that was pretty clunky between them. But I didn't want to do 2 shots because it had been done before. And so I really pushed the team. We've got to get to at least 3 shots. And so we refactored the cartridge completely to make it this thinner cartridge design. And the X3, it's still one of my favorite products we ever made. It was this beautifully designed taser or taser weapon with 3 cartridges. It had a color screen. It could sense if you got a good connection or not. So it would give you red, yellow, or green indicators with an icon letting you know whether or not you made a connection to the target. It was a beautiful piece of art. I mean, the industrial design was really nice. And I remember a couple of the cops in the building saw this thing as we were in development. And they were like, I don't know, boss, that seems pretty big. And I'm like, guys, I hear you, but this is going to have so much capability. Our customers will make room on their belts for the X3. It's going to change the world. Just wait and see. You got to have faith. Okay, you're the boss, but I'm telling you, I think it's too big. I don't know if I would carry it. So roll forward, and now 2009, we launch the Axon body cameras, evidence.com, and the X3. And they all flopped. And the biggest one I can tell you, the X3, the Arizona State Patrol bought 1,000 of them. Their union sued not to wear them because it was so thick that it would interfere with your seatbelt buckle. And so the officer sitting in the car would have to twist their hips to the side to make it fit. And they were getting back problems. And this, for me, was a moment where, like, by 2010, cops didn't want to wear cameras. They were resisting the Axon camera. And we had way overcomplicated the thing. It was hugely over budget. The cable system alone cost us like $200. It was these highly specialized cables with shielding and fiber optics. It had just spun totally out of control. So the camera was like $1,800. It was like as sexy as braces. Famous quote from Luke Larson there. And then we were asking the cops to put their evidence in the cloud, which they told us was illegal. They couldn't put their evidence in the cloud. They wouldn't carry the X3. They were pissed off at us about the X-Rep. They're like, this goddamn thing doesn't work very well. It's $150 a shot. The Shockwave, we built this thing that, like, there was no real buyer for it. And if I had not been the founder, I think the board would have fired me and they would have been justified. But you roll into close? I don't know what was in the board's heads. I would say it probably came pretty close. I did get, a pretty severe, like, hey, we can't afford any more of these. And one of the things that did come from the board, actually, John Caldwell, a retired Army general on our board, really pushed me in this direction of voice of the customer. He's like, hey, great companies really have an integrated way to get the voice of the customer into product development. And what I realized there was, like, I'm not the customer. I love X3, but I've never strapped on body armor. I don't have to get in and out of a patrol car 50 times a day and have to be, worrying about all this equipment and how it interferes with how I sit in the car. And that was the beginning of us. Since that time, we number one, we had to determine we can't keep doing all these things. They're failing. Which things are we going to double down and what are we going to shut down? And so we shut down the X-Rep. We're like, even if we fix it, it's never going to get to the underlying problem that it's never going to be that reliable and we can't get the cost lower. So we shut that down. Shockwave, we shut that down. We didn't have a military customer. We realized we had no idea how we were going to go sell it. The X3, we shut that down, but we pivoted into the X2. The X2 was a salvage program. It was, how do we put the X3 on a diet, cut off one of those cartridges, and have a 2-shot? And we launched that, and that was ultimately reasonably successful. It was certainly not a mega hit, but it sold. And then body cameras at evidence.com, that's where we made our big bet. It was, even though cops don't want to wear cameras, they're telling us they can't use the cloud. And by the way, let me introduce the young Luke Larson. So we had hired Luke. We'd had this idea that, maybe we should try recruit. We needed more consistency in our recruiting. And one of the ideas was, hey, how about we recruit some military veterans? And Luke was a young guy coming out of Marine Corps service. And we hired Luke in, and he turned out to be a pretty transformative guy. He would go on to grow to be the president of the company. But at this point, he was, brand new guy out of the Marine Corps. And he came to me one day and he said, hey, Rick. Oh, by the way, his job, he was the project manager, which meant he was working on the Axon body camera, but he had no authority. He wasn't a designer or decision maker. He was the guy who kept all the notes in the meetings and would track the timelines. And I remember him walking into my office and he said, hey, boss, can I be honest with you? And I said, well, yeah. And he pulls out the Axon, the Axon camera, sets it on my desk, and he said, this thing is an abortion.
Right.
And I was like, what? And forgive me for the strong language, but I want our viewers to feel the moment. He said, this thing's an abortion. There's nothing we can do to save it. And I'm like, okay. And he says, but I have an idea. And he pulls out, he found this consumer camera. There's a company called Looksee that was making Bluetooth headsets with a little camera on it. And he said, let's just stop trying to save this thing. Let me go to Looksee and see if we can buy their camera circuit boards. And then we'll go to Oakley, the eyewear manufacturer, because we notice all these cops are wearing Oakleys. And we'll design the Looksee camera into a new housing that will fit with Oakley sunglasses. And we'll go to market with that. And I said, okay, all right, you've got my attention. Set up the meetings, I'll go with you. And so we flew out to visit Looksee, we flew out to visit Oakley, and we convinced them to do this with us. And by the way, the head of design at Oakley was one Hans Moritz, who is now runs R&D at Axon, but at the time he was the head of design at Oakley. And we convinced them to do it. And then we had to make a decision, right? All these products are failing. We shut them all down, except we kept evidence.com, and we refactored. We stopped working on the original Axon, and we moved to Axon Flex, which was this new, very small body camera, or a head-mountable camera with just a small battery pack integrated into Oakley eyewear. And ultimately, that would go on to save the business, but not for a few more years. We still had a couple years where customers were saying, they didn't want to buy the cameras in evidence.com, but that's where we dug in and we had to place our bets. Shut everything else down, salvage the X3 to the X2, and we're going to place all of our chips on wearable cameras and cloud software.
I think that's what we're going to pick up on the next episode. But I will say, I think Luke Larson was the one that came up with the idea to put the Axon Delta, the little yellow triangle that you see in every body camera video that you see on TV and YouTube. It's become so familiar. I believe that was Luke. That is Luke Larson's idea.
Yeah, we'll come back. Maybe our next episode will be a tribute to Luke. He really was a founder of the modern company that is now Axon. He was a transformative figure, and didn't just reinvent that product, but would go on to have a meteoric rise, helping reinvent the company and everything that we do. And with that, we'll wait to start telling the rising from the ashes of all this litigation and then all these consecutive product failures to build the company into
well, that's a wrap, I believe, for this
today.
episode, Rick. I want to thank everyone for tuning in. As a reminder, we drop an episode every Friday, which you can find on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and, of course, YouTube. And if you want to follow for some behind the scenes and early looks at some of the episodes, you can follow us on X. You can get Rick at Axon Rick, and I am at Mike Wager. So until next time, Rick, have fun where you are, and I'll catch you on the flip side.
Yep, next week we'll start telling you how we turn this train wreck around.